Hello, I'm Louise Bradley, presenting today my talk on mounting religious objects with consideration for access to the object. Welcome to Melbourne, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country on which I stand today, the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. In this presentation, I will discuss two objects that were mounted for preservation with consideration for the need for access on religious holy days. Both objects were mounted in acrylic cradles inside timber frames glazed with UV filtering acrylic. The first object is a fragment of the coffin of an Australian saint, Mary MacKillop. The second is a Greek icon owned by an Australian family. First, I will discuss the coffin fragment of Saint Mary MacKillop, the first Australian saint, beatified in 1995 and canonized in 2010. She was the founder of the Order of the Sisters of St. Joseph, the first religious order to be founded by an Australian. She dedicated her life to the education of the poor and to care of neglected children, the aged and incurably ill. After her death, she was buried in North Sydney. People visited her grave and very often took away earth from around the grave, earth close to this woman who dedicated her life to compassionate care. For this reason, her body was exhumed in 1914 and her coffin was placed in a vault in the Mary MacKillop Memorial Chapel, also in North Sydney. In 1993, before her beatification, the vault was opened again to move the remains to a place beside the altar. Quoting funeral director John Harris, "Very early one morning in December 1993, I and several WN Bull staff members, together with two stonemasons, respectfully opened the tomb in which she had been placed in 1914. Once opened, the crypt revealed that the coffin had deteriorated considerably over the extended period of time during which she had lain there. The fragments of the old cedar coffin were carefully separated, and Mary MacKillop's remains, encased within the coffin's lining, were transferred to a new solid bronze casket to provide improved safety and security and to ensure their preservation. A ceremony was held in the afternoon, and a chapel packed with people witnessed the reinterment of Mary in the new memorial which had been constructed in preparation for her beatification. A Catholic parish connected to the Order of the Sisters of St. Joseph owned a fragment of this original coffin. The priest of the parish brought this fragment to me for mounting after a conservator had treated it. The priest requested a simple mount set in an elegant frame-like case. He also asked that the frame could be opened to bless or touch the fragment. The fragment would be stored horizontally with only occasional handling or vertical presentation. A cradle was made to hold the fragment securely. Pictured here is the fragment with the acrylic cradle before shaping beside the template to the right. It was shaped using an acrylic folding tool made by RH Conservation Engineering. Pictured here is my RH prototype bender. This is a wonderful piece of equipment to have, even if you only occasionally work with acrylic. It's relatively small at 31 by 31 by 12 centimeters and will bend acrylic up to 25 centimeters in width. The small dial in the center adjusts the heating time so you can bend from 2 mil to 8 mil thick acrylic. The acrylic's placed over the hot wire, and once the heat has reached the correct level, you can bend your acrylic up. Here's the acrylic folder in production on the RH Conservation website. In preparation for the framing, I sent samples of different shades of blue polyester fabrics to the priest, who chose a rich blue for the backing and lining of the frame. The back of the case was made of marine ply, sealed with 3 coats of varnish, allowed to off-gas, then covered with 4-ply rising museum ragboard wrapped with the blue fabric. The walls of the case were also made of marine ply, sealed with 3 coats of varnish, then faced with rising museum ragboard covered with the blue fabric. Small acrylic pegs hold the fragment securely in the cradle. The peg at the left was fixed in place. And I'm sorry I don't have detailed photos or really great drawings of these pegs. So here's some original, slightly rough plan drawings. The peg at the right was fitted with a 2x12 millimeter bolt countersunk into the acrylic cradle and up into the tapped peg. Here's the tapping bit with the 2x12 bolt. And of course the peg would be pre-drilled and then tapped. The right peg can be rotated if it's necessary to remove the coffin fragment. Here's an image of the object in the cradle showing the fitting bolts underneath the fragment countersunk into the acrylic. The cradle was fitted to the backing before the object was fitted. The cradle is held onto the frame back using 2x12 millimeter bolts countersunk into the acrylic cradle and passed through holes in the backing, secured with nuts on the exterior of the backing. The bolts were secured to the cradle with mylar and double-sided tape, archival double-sided tape, to facilitate the fitting. Here's a sketch of the frame profile and the cross-section showing the routed spaces for the mirror clip fittings at the back that can be removed for access to the mounted fragment. The glazing is 3mm ROM UV filtering acrylic. And here are 2 images of the final result, with the second image a more true reading of the blue fabric. Now to the mounting and framing of a Greek icon, mounted and framed for vertical display with a removable back so the family could touch the icon on holy days. The conservator who treated the icon recommended that the owner mount and frame the icon to help preserve it. The owner brought the icon to me for a mounting and framing solution. One major consideration for the icon was that it was so precious to the owner that he refused to leave it to me. So on his first visit, I took careful measurements of the icon, and the owner took it home with him. Again, a cradle was needed to hold the icon. Note the extreme convex shape that would inform the design of the cradle. The cradle was made of acrylic with heat-bent sides to hold the edges of the icon. The bottom of the icon was supported and held in place with a curved shelf under the icon with a small tab that fitted over the bottom front center edge. The top of the icon was held with a narrow band with a tab that curved over the center front edge. I must mention here that after preparing the cradle and the frame, the client brought the icon back for fitting into the cradle and frame. Unfortunately, he again refused to leave it because it was so precious to him. He asked if he could wait while I fitted it. When I said that I needed several hours to do this, he agreed to leave and return in 4 hours. This was all a surprise, so there was a little pressure on the finishing of this job. There was enough play between the band and the fitting bolts that the icon could be secured in the cradle, then tightened in when fitting to the backing board. The contact area of the tab was padded with polyester felt. The cradle was held onto the backing using stainless steel pan Phillips head bolts secured to the verso. The backing was made of marine ply, sealed with 3 coats of varnish, allowed to off-gas, then covered with 4-ply rising museum ragboard wrapped with black polyester velvet. This is an image of the icon in the cradle, with the cradle attached to the frame backing board, but not yet fitted into the frame. Again, the cross-section of the frame. The rebate was routed into the section. The frame was cut to size, 3 sides joined, the ROM UV filtering acrylic slid into the rebate, then the bottom fitted with screws. I routed space out of the back edge to accommodate mirror plates for fitting. The back can be removed by unscrewing the mirror plates. And the finished piece. While the icon can be removed, I doubt that the family will remove it now that it is safe and secure, and they can still touch the acrylic and the icon through the acrylic. Thank you for your attention, and I hope that you all stay safe and that your loved ones are safe during this unusual COVID time. Thank you. Look at you, that's cute. They might do Q&A now, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
Louise, we are going to have this next presentation and then do Q&A afterwards.
Okay, great, thanks.
No problem.
Okay. Hi, I'm Louise Bradley, presenting Mounting, a private collection of ethnographic art. Welcome to Melbourne, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak at this forum. Before I begin, I would like to again acknowledge the traditional owners of the country on which we meet, the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. In 2018, I mounted a collection of ethnographic objects from Australia, Indonesia, and Papua New Guinea. It was the wish of the owner to display each object as simply and elegantly as possible, and to allow the owner to remove the pieces for occasional handling. The bases should be movable, so each piece could be displayed in different parts of the owner's home, or so that they could be displayed separately or grouped together. 2 small flat objects are displayed on simple acrylic stands: an Aboriginal pearl shell pubic plate and the Solomon Islands engraved shell ornament. The other objects that I will discuss today required other solutions. First, a Maprik figure from the Maprik region, East Sepik province of Papua New Guinea. From Lombok Island, a knife. Also from Lombok Island, a lime spatula with a man riding an animal. A lime spatula from the Matsim district, the extreme southeast tip of Papua New Guinea. And here's some details of this lovely object. That object was to be mounted with this next object, also from Papua New Guinea, a tool with bird ornament at top. From Lombok, an ornament from a knife or tool depicting a man with a bird above. A bull roarer decorated on both sides, and a second bull roarer. First, I'll describe the mounting of the Maprik figure. The owner of this lovely sculpture had it mounted previously, but was not pleased by a metal rod encircling the waist. He felt that it restricted the freedom of the object. Together, we arrived at a design for an acrylic mount so the figure floated above an acrylic base and would be held at the back using existing holes. These figures generally have long torsos and short legs and very short calves. For this reason, the figure was set at a height approximating the length of the missing legs, around 12 centimeters up from the base. Here are some images of the prototypes made to work out the structure for this mount, showing the chair-like shape needed to hold the body in place. With a flat plate at the top, that would be shaped to fit the curve of the back of the sculpture, placed on a 30 by 30 by 3 centimeter thick base, all to be made in acrylic. I made a model of this proposed mount with the support roughly shaped to fit the contours of the legs of the sculpture. I commissioned a display fabricator to make the base, resulting in this lovely plan they made from my modest model. They made a fine mount, but they did not want to shape the central chair-like support structure, so I shaped it with a Dremel tool and polished the area with jeweler's rouge to fit the sculpture contours. I shaped the back support to fit the curve of the back of the sculpture using a hot air gun, and the sculpture was set in place and fitted using 2 screws countersunk through the acrylic into existing holes in the back of the sculpture. Here's the result. Now the other smaller objects. It was a wish of the owner that the objects be mounted in a most minimal way so they could be easily placed around the home and also may be removed for handling. The decision was made to mount the objects on 3 by 15 by 15 centimeter acrylic blocks with 2 pairs of objects on 3 by 15 by 30 centimeter bases. Small holes would be carved into the acrylic to hold each object. I made sketches of the end of each object to plan out the carving of the base. The shapes were reverse carved into the acrylic using Dremel bits, then polished with jeweler's rouge. The objects stood on the mounts without need for other support. The Lombok tool ornament was mounted on an acrylic rod that took the place of the missing tool. The top of the acrylic rod was shaped to fit the space in the ornament. This solution, with objects freely standing with minimal support, may not suit the needs of all collections, but for this private collector, it was the ideal solution. Thank you kindly for your attention.
Thank you so much for that, Louise. I know we're going to have some questions after those 2 great talks, so I will leave it to Laura to come on and lead the Q&A.
Hello. Yes, we've got some questions coming in. So the first question is, how might you adapt the mounting strategies for the saint's coffin fragment and the icon for a publicly accessible exhibition? And a little added to that is, one of my upcoming exhibitions will include actively venerated pieces. Accessibility for worship is key, as is security.
So how to adapt those existing pieces for public display?
Yes, for a publicly accessible exhibition.
I mean, you could either display them as they are in those cases or in the small frames, or remove the frame, and I would probably put it in a display case though. I mean, to prevent the public from touching it, even though the owner might touch it. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. So it needs to be in a case, but those could be used in a case very easily, those displays.
Yes.
Yes.
And you could either, with a coffin fragment, you could display it horizontally or vertically.
Mm-hmm.
But the icon, obviously, you would want to have vertical, I would say.
For the coffin fragment, how was the acrylic cut to shape?
I was at that point a bit old school, and I used a fine jigsaw blade for acrylic. Mm-hmm. And then basically hand finished it and polished with jeweler's rouge on it. Yeah.
When you polish your acrylic, do you use a Dremel tool or use a buffing wheel?
Buffing wheel, yeah.
Buffing wheel.
And you could use, with the small sculptures on the bases with the reverse carving, I used a very fine Dremel polishing tool mm-hmm. with the rouge on it. And sorry, I didn't have a very good image of the final result. The sort of three-pronged hole was in progress.
And a follow-up to the contour shape. How did you get the contour shape of the object to begin with?
The icon or the Mapric figure?
I think either one. Or both.
Well, with the icon, I believe I traced it. And then I prepared the cradle because it was a simple semicircle, I prepared it to shape with the measurement of the depth of the icon and the tab at the edge, because it had to be ready for when the owner came, because he wouldn't leave it for more than a couple of hours.
Right.
For the Mapric figure, because I had that, I was able to, with the foam core, I could carve it until I thought it fitted. And I assumed that the fabricator could do that for me. But when they said no, I had to do it. And it was a matter of trying to copy the foam core model and then fitting the figure on. And once it fit fairly well, then I started to polish and refine from there.
Question, do you seek approval from conservators' collections teams to fix mounts into existing holes in objects? And how common is that in practice?
I believe it's fairly common. I think in the museum world, the approach would be to not secure something, or definitely not to add a hole. And ideally, maybe not even use an existing hole if you could use acrylic or a metal band to hold something. But this collector said that he would rather nothing hold that little figure. And he said, just put some holes in it. And I explained that ethically, I couldn't do that, but I could use existing holes. And he also said, well, could you please use brass screws, which was interesting. Yeah. Yeah. He was very, very particular. And he's probably one of the most interesting, important, and caring figures in the art world, who's become a little bit reclusive, but he has a great deal of knowledge about art and objects.
Are you concerned about the tips of the small ethnographic objects breaking or being damaged while on display with no other support?
Yeah, that's a good point. There is a concern, but again, this collector he's almost a museum practice informed person. And I imagine he would be extraordinarily careful. Another issue, which is why they aren't secured in any permanent way, is that there's a risk of bushfire. So every year he moves these objects out well before the bushfire season and has them in another location and then moves them back again. So they need to be movable, and he would remove them from that support and take off with them. Yeah.
I would never think that you have to move your collection because of bushfires, but that's because I live not in a place with bushfires.
Well, an interesting issue there is that a lot of people might have to flee very, very quickly
Mm-hmm.
and leave everything behind and hope that things survive. But in this case, this person knows what he will remove well before any danger. And also he removes himself, obviously, well before danger. But yeah, he's very well informed and understands the importance of being an owner.
The next question is, when securing the first figure from the ethnographic collection, why did you use screws instead of acrylic rods?
The owner requested screws, and it's possible that it was because he wanted to be able to pack it up in the bushfire season. And acrylic rods would mean that he had to take the piece on the mount. And from memory, I think with these objects, he would rather be able to pack the objects separately and move them, because he tends to do his own movement and, in a domestic vehicle. And rods would have been a good idea, but he also wanted to not have anything encircling the figure. I mean, I personally might have had an acrylic rod encircling, but he didn't want that.
Is there any question of objects or mounts being blessed during a ritual?
With the Mary MacKillop, I believe they do regularly bring it out. And I think it was just a couple of weeks ago, it was the 10th anniversary of her canonization. And unfortunately, I don't exactly know where this fragment is now, but I would imagine it would have been brought out and presented to the congregation and maybe blessed at that time. But I should say that with both of those, the icon and the fragment, I doubt that they'll remove the back of the frame. I mean, it's possible, but I think that might happen very, very rarely. But you did see with the icon, I think the family may have seen that it had deteriorated from some touching, and that once it was encased, they might see that as an ideal solution to preserving it for the next generation. And again, I don't know where that is or what happened to it. I'm sure it's extremely safe, but they didn't tell me where it would be located.
Right.
I mean, I'd like to see it again, but it was as if he was handling his kind of the soul of his whole existence. His whole family was in that piece. And the look of terror when I said, "Look, you will leave it with me." And he said, "Oh, no, absolutely not." So you just work around those concerns.
Right. We have a question from Vincent. Our museum is just beginning to consider our collection pieces in larger cultural context and is now beginning to take stock and re-examine displays. Has this been an ongoing practice for you, or has this come up in just a recent cultural shift?
In Australia, that has been in process for maybe even the last few decades.
Wow.
And yes, it is very important. And there's also a program to help to train and bring more Indigenous people into the treatment of their own objects. And Melbourne University has a big program. Normally, students need to have an undergraduate degree to enter the Master's Conservation Program. But in the Indigenous communities, the students can come in because they have such a great base of the cultural knowledge.
Right.
But it is a major, major importance. And I mean, I don't know if you know, there are objects in the Indigenous culture that women should not see, and probably vice versa. And when those treatments take place, they aim to find a male conservator who can do the treatment or obscure the areas of the object with the permission of the cultural owners. Get permission that a woman can treat the area that's not hidden. I mean, a small part of the object will be available for treatment at a time, but it's a major issue, and there have been some really good papers written on it. Yeah.
I had a question, which is, how did you get started working with acrylic?
I'm not really sure. I think it arose from the need to use something that was inert and also as minimal as possible. And also, when I began working with acrylic, I was in contact with my friend Robin, who made that, the bending machine. But it's also something that if you're making small supports, you can also do it or work it with really old school methods of hot air guns, jigsaws, even hand cutting when necessary. But when you want something really, those very dense, thick supports, I'd rather leave that to a fabricator. And if I've ever used or had really large cases for display, when you need bevel cut edges with heat polishing, I'd rather a fabricator do that.
Right.
Yeah.
And then what is the tool that you cannot live without when you're working with acrylic?
Oh boy. I suppose the polishing is extremely important, but one fantastic tool for if you work as a framer, and a lot of framers won't use UV acrylic or acrylic because they need to order one sheet cut to size. Those Olfa hand cutting tools are unbelievable. And you buy one and it will work, 20, 30 years later, it's good as new. And you can easily zip pieces to size or even cut little bands, file them back, polish them. Yeah, the Olfa cutting tool, but Olfa in general makes such great hand tools.
Yes. And so you mean like a cutting tool or like a rotary cutter?
It's score and snap. So it looks like it's probably about 2.5 to 3 centimeters long with a little hook on the end.
Oh.
Extremely sharp. Sorry, I don't have it with me.
I know, I was just looking for my blade, but I don't think I have it. I have a rotary cutter here, which is, but
down in drawer 3 in a little box, a yellow handle.
Yeah, I don't have mine.
It kind of looks like that, but a little more.
Oh.
With a yellow handle.
Oh, but, and it has a hook on the end. That's very useful.
Yeah, it is amazing. And also you can open up the handle and there's a spare blade inside, but with that beautiful Japanese steel, that one blade would probably last you 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah, if you're a small shop or a small museum and you don't have a big team, it's really great for cutting quickly in an emergency. Yeah.
Cool. I
would say that I've rediscovered the joys of Japanese tools, and I bought some exquisite clamps, brass clamps, really teeny ones, and Japanese awls are very beautiful to use. Yeah,
I'll be looking into it.
Here it is.
I didn't want to you have the tool? Oh, brilliant.
That's it.
So there's your Olfa. I can put a link up to it. Put the blade into my jumper.
That's great.
And you can open up that side, and that's where you'll find the your spare blade. I'll bet you can find them on eBay. Because most art shops won't stock these.
I think we'll have to continue the tool talk in an after party session. I'm sure there'll be a whole room that would love to hear more about these Japanese tools. Thank you so much, Louise, for your interesting presentations. It certainly created a lot of discussion in the chat. That wraps up our first day of presentations for the IMF 2020. We're so happy to be able to reach out across the globe, even in this strange time, to talk about mount making.